For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. Welcome to Some Shit I Read. I'm your host, Bruce Pointset, and this is the series where we take passages from different selections of literature, dig into why they're meaningful, and how we can take this info into our daily lives and movements. Today, we're talking Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Let's get into it. So I found this book at the end of my junior year of college at the University of Oregon at the good old UO bookstore. I think that day I also got this book, Fight the Power by Chuck D. And I'll probably be doing one of these episodes on that later. But, anyways, what I really remember about this time was just that it was the summer I really embraced the UO library and just really getting into doing the reading, not just for assignments, but just for my own, you know, growth. So, you know, I remember just spending seemingly every idle moment that summer just reading, if you're getting onto the bus, in between classes, even for that, honestly, for that upcoming senior year. So, you want to get an idea of what that looked like. Here's basically my daily schedule any day of my senior year of college. Wake up, watch a little MSNBC, eat breakfast, do 100 push-ups, read a book on the bus ride to class, in between classes, and on the way back home. Then read every story on the front page of Al Jazeera English, commondreams.org, the New York Times, The Root, and the Oregonian. Knock out 400 more push-ups, watch Democracy Now, do 8-minute abs, eat somewhere in there, read more of the book anytime there was idle time in between those moments, watch The Daily Show, Colbert Report, and then turn on a political documentary to go to sleep, rinse, and repeat. That was every day my senior year. So, needless to say, I was consuming a lot of information, obviously very much politically driven and looking at, social justice movements specifically. But the idea was just, rapid growth and, trying to be as informed as I could possibly be. Now, just to be clear, I wouldn't recommend this regimen personally, and I'm pretty sure it contributed to a panic attack I ended up having 3 years later, but I digress. Essentially, it was a time of a lot of reading, and one of the most influential reads of that moment in time for me was Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. Once again, co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, along with Bobby Seale. So I was certainly enthralled by Huey's story, as basically this self-taught educator who, sharing these philosophies he had as a revolutionary leader. And I was also, though, I was also enthralled by some of the anecdotes and felt like I could particularly relate. He talked about having this feeling like he had this chip on his shoulder as a light-skinned black man. And for those who, light skin means something a little bit differently, I think, in 2021 than it meant, in the 60s and 70s, or even in the 90s when I grew up. And honestly, when you talk about light skin, it means not just different things depending on the time you're in, but also which spaces you're in. Sometimes it means mixed, sometimes it just means, as Charlemagne the God once put it, waffle colored Negroes like myself. So, depending on the time, place, location, where you are, sometimes even in just a description of attitude, that you get qualified as light skin or qualified as different, and you have this chip on your shoulder to really prove your blackness. But again, I digress. Huey talked about having that chip on his shoulder, and also, just being the black guy at parties who didn't dance. So instead, he would he made his way. He sort of, made this thing for himself where he was either talking politics or getting in fights. Now, I could relate to the former. I couldn't really relate to the latter. I'm no one's tough guy. I did some more beer pong, you know, cue all the black guy in the suburbs jokes, and they're deserved. But again, I digress. The whole, I read this book in college and opened my mind forever thing is kind of a cliche, but I think with revolutionary suicide, you know, it's really how I felt. You had this character and human being, Huey Newton, who, I could relate to for these various reasons. But then you also had these philosophies of, you know, revolution, of justice, of the pursuit of justice, and this idea of revolutionary suicide, which we're going to get to in a little bit, that just it really changed how I approached life and how I approached my thoughts around organizing work. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Huey P. Newton's story is far more complex and complicated than any single piece of literature, especially autobiographical literature, could convey. And I highly recommend you do some more expansive research. We're not, there are no flawless deities out here. We're all humans with our flaws. That said, this work is a literary classic for a reason. And for me, I think the following passage really highlights why that is. So, with that, let's get into the text. So, here's this passage from Revolutionary Suicide that I think really encompasses the whole the ethos of it. And I'll read it for you now. I do not think that life will change for the better without an assault on the establishment, which goes on exploiting the wretched of the earth. This belief lies at the heart of the concept of revolutionary suicide. Thus, it is better to oppose the forces that would drive me to self murder than to endure them. Although I risk the likelihood of death, there is at least the possibility, if not the probability, of changing intolerable conditions. This possibility is important because much in human existence is based upon hope without any real understanding of the odds. Indeed, we are all, black and white alike, ill in the same way, mortally ill. But before we die, how shall we live? I say with hope and dignity, and if premature death is the result, that death has a meaning reactionary suicide can never have. It is the price of self respect. Revolutionary suicide does not mean that I and my comrades have a wish, excuse me. It means just the opposite. We have such a strong desire to live with hope and human dignity that existence without them is impossible. When reactionary forces crush us, we must move against these forces, even at the risk of death. We will have to be driven out with a stick. To me, that passage is really it's the thesis for how we move. The contrast between revolutionary versus reactionary. Are you just letting are you just reacting to the status quo and letting it dictate you? Or are you being revolutionary in defying it and creating a different reality? Or simply put, when the status quo is unacceptable, then we must refuse to accept it. It's really that simple. So I read this quote in 2010, and to give you an idea of the time period, we were heading into the midterm elections. the Tea Party was on the rise, holding parades, literally hanging effigies of Obama. Meanwhile, his Democratic colleagues were pretty much doing everything they could to, one, kind of paint these Tea Party people as just reasonable people with a difference of opinion, but then also backing away from Obama under the guise of, the Affordable Care Act was a step too far. During this time, we were also, heavily in the midst of the continued wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the Obama administration was exponentially increasing the use of drone strikes throughout the Middle East and Africa. So, between these conditions and just, my voracious reading regimen, which I described to you earlier, it wasn't really hard for me to decide where I stood morally and make an estimation of where things were going in the world and how bad things could get if we stayed on this same path of the status quo. Now, obviously, there's a wide gap between finding your purpose and then actually contributing, never mind contributing meaningfully, never mind not just contributing, but executing effectively. I'm still living and learning to this day. But why revolutionary suicide touched me so much was because it was a story of diving into the revolution headfirst through the eyes of Huey, and then applying all this knowledge that, he was teaching himself in many cases, all basically just on the job, making mistakes, adjusting, and then continuing to push forward. And I believe it's so powerful because it marries this urgency with the forethought and the vision for things, for change, really, that many of us are still trying to manifest to this day. Which brings me to, so ironically, even though the subject is grassroots revolutionary organizing, I think one of the biggest areas where we can apply this idea of revolutionary suicide is actually electoral politics. Think about proposals like abolish ICE, universal health care, free college, the Green New Deal, defunding or gas, dare I say, abolishing the police. We frame these as bold ideas, but they are merely proposals that are arguing what we already know. The status quo is not acceptable, nor is it sustainable. And it should be noted that the reason we have free breakfast programs in public schools now is because of the Black Panthers and their free breakfast program, which at one point J. Edgar Hoover deemed the biggest threat to the safety and security of the United States. Side note, we're out here removing Confederate monuments as we should. And why are we not taking Hoover's name off of everything? Seriously, fuck that guy. Anyways, by getting skittish when it comes to these large scale proposals and these ideas for change, what we're really doing is, giving cover for these systemic atrocities to continue. And effectively, you know, giving cover to the things that are killing us slowly, sometimes, very quickly, literally shooting people dead in the streets. Thus, we must be persistent, forceful, and creative in doing what needs to be done to build a new reality, excuse me, that equitably serves everyone. That means organizing and going hard for these changes. But remember what I said earlier about the panic attack. It wasn't just that I was reading with all my idle time. That's not what brought that on. I was also working as a reporter. I was also trying to help a friend who was going through a very rough patch at the time, in addition to everything else that was happening in my life. So, what really happened was just I was in a space where, you know, I thought, hey, there's 24 hours in a day. Let me make the most of each one of them and try and do everything. You look at these proposals I just mentioned, that's as if saying, okay, I'm going to try and get the Green New Deal. I'm going to try and abolish ICE and get universal health care. And I'm going to work, work every waking hour on all these things. But what happens is we're humans. And sometimes our bodies tell us, you got to push back. You may be trying to create a new reality, but what good is that new reality if you don't make it there and you're not able to pass off the knowledge you've learned? So, my lesson from that moment for me was just you can't do everything. And part of creating this new reality is also taking care of yourself. It's a whole different, when we talk about revolutionary suicide, we're creating new realities to be sustainable. And that means taking care of the whole person. You have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to be able to develop a self care regimen in addition to doing the work and doing it with intentionality and with urgency. Yes, resisting oppressive forces may result in your demise, but that demise shouldn't be the result of self destruction. More so than going out in a blaze of glory, doing this long term foundational work that creates a better future for those coming behind you, that is what truly threatens the powers that be. Remember that. That's what threatens these institutions that are working against you, these police unions, these corrupt politicians. Yeah, you can think about fighting them in the most obvious form of resistance, but when you start taking control of seats of power so that you can pass things like a Green New Deal, when you start changing corrupt laws, when you start putting our tax dollars where they need to go to serve the people, whether it's for free healthcare, whether, again, for free college, and maybe that's taking money away from the gun lobby. Maybe that's taking away money from big pharma, from the oil industry. That scares them a lot more than any idea of a violent uprising ever will. But more importantly, these sound like bold ideas, but they are doable. But it takes that mindset of revolutionary suicide, of saying the status quo is not acceptable. The status quo is killing me. So instead of letting it kill me and kill my people and kill those I love and those and killing everyone, frankly, we got to do the work. We got to do what must be done. We have to commit to the long term fight. And we have to be able to stay on course. Intimidation happens. Again, we talk about it's not, the idea is not preparing or, uh, the idea isn't for hoping for some violent uprising, but when you get the intimidations that come from the powers that be, it's a matter of protecting yourself. And then there's every which way of distraction. When I'm recording this right now, we just passed a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. And you had a bunch of Republicans who refused to vote for that much needed support for Americans. And they spent this entire week talking about Space Jam and a false idea of that we're banning Dr. Seuss. It is taking this, it is looking at these distractions, these intimidations, or these efforts to intimidating us and not letting them deter us from the course of creating a new reality, of creating a revolutionary reality. And it's staying committed until we see these realities come to fruition. And with that, I'd like to wrap up another episode of Some Shit I Read. Remember, please like, share, subscribe, And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you read Revolutionary Suicide? What other works by Black Panther leaders have you read? How do they compare and contrast? What's your favorite passage, whether it be from Revolutionary Suicide, maybe Soul on Ice, the autobiography of Asad Shakur, any number of these books. I'd love to know. And more importantly, where do you see areas where you or your people can move in a revolutionary rather than reactionary way in your life? What are some movements that are currently happening? Again, let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'll see you on the next video. And remember, take Hoover's name off of everything. Like, this shouldn't even be a question. Anyways, take it easy, y'all. Bye. Thank you for watching. Please like and share and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all of the latest videos. Thank you.